In a small-town courthouse, a group of cops cracked cruel jokes about a woman they assumed was nobody until the judge stood up and revealed that she was a director of the FBI. If you weren't paying attention, you might have missed it. Selena Price stepped out of the silver rental car, her heels tapping softly as she crossed the cracked parking lot of the Odessa County Courthouse. She walked with the ease of someone who had nowhere important to be. Her navy blue suit was sharp but plain, and her black flats made no sound on the concrete. Odessa, Missouri, a town that seemed to have remained unchanged for 30 years, was a place where first impressions held more weight than truth. To the men leaning against the brick wall by the courthouse entrance, Selena appeared to be just another average visitor, someone they had already made up their minds about. "Another one," muttered one deputy, adjusting his sunglasses. He nudged his buddy, who smirked without even looking up. Selena heard their words but didn't react. She kept walking. The courthouse was old, its yellowed windows and faded brown doors revealing the toll of time. A rusty flagpole stood outside, with the American flag barely stirring in the thick afternoon heat. Selena moved through the scene with the calm of someone who had spent years learning not to reveal too much too soon. Every step was calculated, every blink deliberate. Inside, the air smelled faintly of stale coffee and furniture polish, and a heavy fan rattled near the entrance, struggling against the oppressive humidity. Selena paused just beyond the door for a moment, allowing her eyes to adjust to the dimmer light inside. Behind the security desk, two officers sat slouched in their chairs, half watching a small TV mounted in the corner. When Selena approached, they barely glanced at her. "Purpose of your visit?" one mumbled, more out of routine than curiosity. "Observation," Selena replied simply, offering no further detail. The officer shrugged and waved her through. No ID check, no clipboard. In their minds, she was nobody. Maybe a witness. Perhaps someone begging for mercy over a traffic ticket. Either way, not worth the effort. Selena walked past them without missing a beat. The hallway floor squeaked under her shoes as she moved deeper into the building, passing worn bulletin boards filled with old missing persons flyers, bake sale announcements, and jury duty reminders, all curling at the edges. As she moved further into the courthouse, she could feel the weight of its history pressing down on her, but not in a good way. She reached the courtroom she was looking for, courtroom 2B. The door was slightly ajar, so she quietly stepped inside and took a seat in the back row, where few would notice her. At the front of the room, the judge's bench stood empty, and a few lawyers shuffled papers near the prosecution and defense tables. A group of sheriff's deputies, dressed in khaki uniforms and black boots, lounged along the side benches, laughing loudly, far too loud for a room meant to administer justice. Selena didn't stare, but she listened closely. "She's here for child support," one deputy chuckled, jerking his thumb in her direction. His friends snickered, none of them bothering to lower their voices. "Or shoplifting," another added. Either way, it didn't seem like they cared to guess further. "She's about to get roasted," one of the deputies whispered, just loud enough for Selena to hear. With a calm expression, Selena pulled out a small notepad from her bag and wrote a single sentence. "They don't even hide it." She tucked the notepad away quickly, making sure no one saw the quiet act of defiance. The deputy closest to her, a burly man with a buzz cut and too many rings on his fingers, leaned toward his colleague and said in a tone that wasn't even trying to be subtle, "She'll cry before the hearing's done." "They always do." Selena's face remained impassive. No raised eyebrows, no narrowing her eyes. She had perfected the art of giving nothing away. Inside, though, she was counting every comment, every sneer, every laugh that echoed a little too loudly against the high ceilings of the courthouse. She knew better than to react. She wasn't here to argue or defend herself. She was here to observe, to see who these men were when they thought no one important was watching. And so far, they were making her job extremely easy. Outside the courtroom windows, the sun blazed down on the parking lot, casting long, broken shadows. Inside, the air felt thicker, hotter, but it wasn't the weather. It was the arrogance, the careless confidence of people who believed they were above accountability. Selena straightened in her seat, resting her hands calmly on her lap. The hearing was about to begin, and they had no idea what was coming. Things were about to move faster than they could ever imagine. The judge hadn't even entered yet, but the room already felt like a boys' club. Selena kept her head slightly bowed, pretending to scan the inside of her handbag. This gave the deputies even more confidence to let their true feelings slip. You see the way she sat down? Like she owns the place. One deputy near the aisle chuckled, loud enough for the others to hear. Yeah, another snorted. Give her 5 minutes, and she'll be begging for a public defender. The jokes weren't even creative, just lazy, hollow, and cruel. Selena had seen the scenario play out too many times before. Not once, not twice, but far too many times in places like this, where a badge meant you could act without fear of consequences. The older deputy with the beer gut and faded tattoos leaned back in his chair, popping a stick of gum into his mouth. Bet she's going to pull the race card as soon as her case gets called, he said with a grin. Please, another muttered. Probably got 3 baby daddies and a sob story. The laughter that followed was meaner this time, sharper. Selena glanced up briefly, memorizing their faces. Each man, each smirk, each little moment where they felt safe enough to show who they truly were when they thought no one important was watching. She wasn't angry, not yet. Anger would come later when it mattered. For now, she just listened. The courtroom filled slowly. A few citizens trickled in. A woman cradling a worn leather purse, a young man nervously adjusting his tie. A few defense attorneys joked by the front, swapping gossip about weekend plans. It was a usual courthouse noise, but Selena never lost track of the deputies. One of them pulled out his phone, angling it just enough for the others to see. It was a meme, a nasty one, a caricature of a woman with exaggerated features. The caption read, "Caught today, looking for sympathy." The deputies roared with laughter, their heads turning toward the screen, oblivious of the few attorneys who glanced back, frowning but saying nothing. Selena clenched her hands under her handbag where no one could see. The officer who had shown the meme turned to the others, whispering, "Bet she's here trying to scam the system. Look at her." They all got that look. They don't even care anymore. Selena wanted to ask him to look him dead in the eyes and demand, "What exactly do you mean by them?" But she stayed silent, knowing the moment was still building. Soon, it would hit them harder than any question could. At the front of the room, the bailiff shuffled into place, tapping his folder against his hand to signal that the judge was on the way. The attorneys scrambled to gather their papers. The game was about to change, and these men had no idea who they were dealing with. The room fell into a tense silence as the deputies exchanged one last smug look before settling into a lazy form of attention. Selena straightened slightly in her seat, feeling her pulse slow, steadying herself for what was to come. One of the younger deputies, barely old enough to shave, leaned toward the heavier one and whispered, "After this, we're grabbing lunch at Big Jack's. Bet I can guess what she orders. Fried chicken and sweet tea." The older deputy chuckled, rubbing his chin as if weighing a bet. The bailiff's voice cut through the air. "All rise." The side door swung open, and Judge Calvin Myers entered, his robe swishing lightly behind him. A large man with a booming voice and a reputation for impatience. He didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. "Be seated," he barked, and the courtroom obeyed. The judge flipped through a few papers on his desk before peering over his glasses at the room. "We have an important matter today," he said, his voice gruff. "Before we get to the docket, I want to introduce someone who's come a long way to be here." The deputies shifted slightly, bored and expecting yet another politician or inspector who wouldn't matter. Judge Myers continued, "This is Director Selena Price of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." For a brief moment, the courthouse seemed to forget how to breathe. The laughter, the smirks, the whispered jokes, they all died instantly. Selena rose to her feet, her movements composed and dignified, her gaze meeting theirs head-on. No anger, no smugness, just a quiet authority that filled every corner of the room without needing to shout. The heavy-set deputy's mouth actually fell open. The younger one who had cracked a fried chicken joke turned a shade paler, tugging at his collar, as if the room had suddenly grown 20 degrees hotter. But the worst was still ahead, and none of them were prepared. The weight of the moment hit the deputies like a ton of bricks. Selena Price, director of the FBI, stood there in her plain navy suit, staring directly at the group of men who had spent the last 20 minutes tearing her down like she was nothing more than a punchline. The courtroom was eerily silent. The deputies shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the air between them thick with embarrassment and something closer to fear. Nobody dared move too quickly, as if hoping they could somehow make themselves invisible. Selena didn't rush to speak. She didn't need to. Judge Myers cleared his throat, thick and uncomfortable, before glancing at Selena. Director Price is here for a formal federal observation and evaluation process. Given the serious nature of several recent complaints, she'll be joining today's proceedings. The judge's voice dropped lower on that last sentence, as if even he was second-guessing himself. The temperature in the room shifted again. Selena gave a polite nod, as calm as still water. At the back of the room, the officers started exchanging frantic glances. The older deputy leaned toward the younger one, his voice tight with panic. "You said she was—" "I didn't know." The younger deputy hissed back, barely moving his lips. Selena caught the exchange but didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. Instead, she simply tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and sat back down. The trial was officially about to begin, but no one was focused on the docket anymore. Every breath, every cough, every squeak of a chair echoed too loudly in the room. The officers, who had been so quick to laugh earlier, now sat rigid and silent, their faces flushed with discomfort. Judge Myers banged his gavel once, bringing the room to order. "We'll proceed," he announced, but nobody truly believed this was just business as usual. Selena's eyes swept the room, slow and methodical. She wasn't scanning for drama. She was scanning for character. Who had looked uncomfortable when the joke started? Who had laughed the loudest? Who had stayed silent, thinking that silence would keep their hands clean? She remembered every detail. The defense lawyer stood up to present the first case, a property dispute. But in that moment, nothing in the room felt normal anymore. The stakes had just changed. The tension between the neighbors was thick, but the tension behind closed doors was even heavier than the heat outside. The deputies sat like school children, waiting for the principal to call their names. Some tried to act normal, tapping their pens, flipping to their phones, while others stared at the floor of their boots. Anything but Selena. Yet, every few seconds, one would sneak a glance away, checking if she was still there. She was, and she wasn't just there for show. Selena shifted slightly in her seat, jotting a few notes, not about the case, but about everything else. Body language, reactions, attempts to minimize presence. This was more than just an observation now. It was a study in instinct. Who panicked when the mirror was held up to them? Finally, one of the deputies, a man with thinning hair and a deep sunburn across his nose, cracked. He whispered to the deputy next to him. Maybe she didn't hear everything. The other deputy shook his head quickly. She heard. She was right there. Both men fell silent again, stiff in their seats, while Selena calmly scribbled another note into her pad. In her mind, she wasn't just making a list of names to punish. She was noting habits, patterns, the little ugly truths that didn't show up on reports but screamed loud in real life. The kind of truths you couldn't deny when daylight hit. 15 minutes dragged by. The property case wrapped up, and the next one was called a misdemeanor theft charge against a local teenager. The judge barely lifted his head as the lawyers shuffled papers, and the boy, maybe 17, stood awkwardly at the defense table. Selena's eyes moved to the deputies. Would they mock him too? Would they joke about his family, about his background? For once, they stayed silent. Not because they had changed, but because they finally understood that someone important was paying attention. Selena pressed the tip of her pen lightly against the paper, feeling the tension tighten like a vice around the room. She wasn't just here to observe anymore. She was here to make sure they understood something. No badge, no locker room, no courthouse laughter could cover it up. Respect wasn't optional. It never had been. But the real reckoning hadn't even started yet, and there was no running from it now. Judge Myers called a short recess. He needed it. Everyone did. The second the gavel struck, conversations that had been bottled up exploded in low, frantic whispers. Selena stayed seated, observing. The deputies didn't. They huddled together by the courtroom doors, speaking in rushed, clipped sentences. Their earlier arrogance had evaporated. What remained was a strange, twitchy energy, like schoolboys caught passing notes during a final exam. "I swear, man, I didn't say anything," one deputy stammered, throwing quick glances over his shoulder. "She heard everything," another muttered back. "Don't kid yourself. You think she's going to file reports on us?" "File reports?" The heavy-set deputy scoffed bitterly. "She's a damn FBI director. She could have us buried under paperwork by noon." Selena sat quietly, watching. She wasn't guessing at what they were saying. She didn't need to. Their faces told the whole story. The nervous, darting eyes, the forced, jerky laughs that sounded more like hiccups, the quick wipes of sweaty palms against stiff uniforms. She didn't move until the deputies glanced her way. When they did, she met their gaze, steady and unblinking. Not a glare, not a smirk. Just a calm reminder that she had seen them all of them. Judge Myers returned to the bench, wiping his forehead with a crumpled handkerchief. He cleared his throat and said, "Before we continue, Director Price would like to address the court." A ripple of panic ran across the room. Selena rose slowly, stepping into the center of the floor. She didn't need a microphone. Her voice carried, clear, even and strong. "My name is Selena Price," she began. "I am the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You could have heard a paperclip drop." Selena's voice rang out across the courtroom, and for a moment, the air seemed to still. "I'm here today because this courthouse has been cited in multiple allegations of misconduct," she continued, her gaze sweeping over the room. "Racial bias, abuse of authority, violations of due process." The color drained from more than a few faces in the room. "I came today without warning," Selena pressed on, her voice calm but firm. "Without an entourage, without a badge on my chest. Because I wanted to see how the justice system in Odessa County treats those it assumes have no power." She let the words hang in the thick, suffocating air of the courtroom, watching as her statement sank in. "And what I witnessed," she said, pausing just long enough to tighten the knot in everyone's chest, "confirmed why I am here." Murmurs rippled through the benches as the defense attorneys shifted nervously and the prosecutors looked away. The deputies, who had been so brazen just a moment ago, practically melted into their seats. Selena raised a hand, lightly but authoritatively, and the room fell silent once again. "You are public servants," she said, her voice still calm but now carrying a sharper edge. "You are entrusted with the dignity, the safety, and the rights of every person who walks through those doors." Her gaze locked onto the cluster of deputies near the back. "That trust is not a privilege you get to abuse," she continued. "It's a responsibility you either honor or forfeit." The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They landed with the weight of bricks, one by one. The deputies who had laughed earlier dropped their eyes to the floor. No excuses left to throw around. No locker room jokes to hide behind. Selena finished simply. "This courthouse, starting today, is under federal review. Actions have consequences. Silence has consequences." Judge Myers coughed into his fist, clearly struggling to regain control of the room. "We'll, reconvene in 20 minutes, he stammered, hastily slamming the gavel down harder than necessary. The room emptied fast, like rats fleeing a sinking ship. But Selena stayed standing, watching the storm she had triggered start to build around her. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't enjoying it. She was doing her job the way it should have been done all along. Exposing the truth was just the first crack. The real collapse was about to begin. The courthouse halls buzzed with nervous energy. Deputies huddled in corners, whispering furiously. Lawyers paced back and forth, pretending to check files while sneaking glances at Selena. Even the janitor, pushing his mop, gave her a wide berth, as though being too close might drag him into the storm. Selena walked calmly to a small waiting room off the main corridor. She wasn't hiding. She was preparing. Within minutes, a team of federal agents, dressed in plain clothes but unmistakably sharp, filed into the courthouse through a side entrance. No lights, no sirens, no grand entrance, just a quiet shift in the atmosphere that made every uniformed officer straighten his back. Selena met them briefly, handing over her notes. They think today was just a warning, she said quietly, handing a slim folder to Agent Reese, a tall man with sharp eyes and a reputation for getting things done. It's not, she added, her voice low and steady. Reese nodded once and slipped the folder into his jacket. Selena didn't need to stand over them. Her part was already in motion. Now, the system would do what it was supposed to do. As she stepped back into the main hallway, she caught sight of the deputies who had spent the morning mocking her. They were lined up near the security desk, eyes wide, mouths tight, waiting for something they didn't fully understand yet. Selena approached slowly, her heels clicking against the worn linoleum floor. A senior federal agent, Agent Sullivan, began reading off names. Deputy Todd Gleason, he called. A tall, wiry man with a crooked nose flinched. He stepped forward, trying to act casual. Yeah, you're suspended pending investigation, Sullivan announced. The words hit Gleason like a slap. He opened his mouth to argue, but one look from Selena shut him down. He swallowed hard, his shoulders slumping as he lowered his head. Deputy Mark Callan, Sullivan continued, and the storm was only just beginning till he stepped forward, his uniform slightly wrinkled, his badge gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. The same announcement rang out, and the same stunned reaction followed. One by one, names were called, and one by one, they were stripped of their authority, at least temporarily. The heavy-set deputy from earlier, the one who had cracked the ugliest jokes, actually tried to laugh it off. This is ridiculous, he muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Selena turned toward him, her voice steady and cold. Not jokes, she said. Patterns. He met her gaze, ready to snap back, but something in her expression stopped him. It wasn't anger nor pity, just a quiet certainty, as though his excuses no longer mattered. The world had moved on without him, leaving him behind. The courtroom was being emptied. Trials were delayed, hearings postponed, lawyers were calling clients, and judges were consulting nervously with state officials. Selena stood near the exit, quietly watching it all unfold. A woman in a faded green blouse approached her, clutching a small folder to her chest. Director Price? She asked hesitantly. Selena turned and offered a small professional smile. Yes. The woman's voice shook. Thank you. You don't know how long we've been waiting for someone to actually listen. Selena didn't reply much. She simply nodded. Sometimes, the right words were the ones that didn't need to be spoken at all. More community members appeared, some hanging back, some inching forward. It wasn't a wave, not yet, but it was a start. People were realizing that maybe the courthouse wasn't invincible, that maybe fear wasn't their only option anymore. Inside, deputies continued filing out, each under the careful watch of federal agents. No shouting, no handcuffs, just a slow, public stripping of power. The kind of power that made a man rethink every sneer he ever threw across a courtroom. Selena didn't gloat. She didn't smile. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring what had been broken without making yourself a little more broken in the process. As the sun dropped lower in the Missouri sky, the courthouse doors swung shut behind the last of the suspended deputies. For the first time in a long while, silence wasn't a threat. It was a beginning. But real change wasn't just about taking away. It was about building something stronger. And that part was still ahead. The days that followed weren't quiet. They were messy, loud, and the way change always is when people had gotten too comfortable. Federal investigators set up in a small, plain office 2 blocks from the courthouse. Selena made sure of it. There was no need for a flashy presence. Quiet pressure worked better. It let the truth rise up without being choked by noise. One by one, people came through the doors. Some were deputies trying to explain themselves. Some were former defendants, finally brave enough to tell their stories. And some were just citizens who had spent years swallowing their words. Selena sat in on a few interviews, always in the corner, her notepad open but mostly untouched. She wasn't there to interrogate. She was there to listen. Really listen. Something this town had been starved of for a long time. The interviews weren't easy to sit through. There was a young man, barely 20, who said he had been pulled over 7 times in 6 months for looking suspicious while driving home from his night shift at the mill. There was a grandmother who described how her grandson's shoplifting ticket had turned into a week in juvenile detention because no one had bothered to call his public defender on time. There was a middle-aged teacher, face flushed with frustration, recounting how she had been ticketed outside her own school for loitering, while white parents parked without issue every day. The faces changed, but the pain didn't. It clung to the room like humidity. Selena kept her face neutral, but inside, it boiled. She wasn't new to injustice, but there was something about how casual it had become here, how accepted. It was a part of the system, ingrained and overlooked, until now. The words caught in her throat, harder to swallow than usual. Federal agents built files, linked complaints, and mapped out patterns, and slowly, the web began to tighten. Some of the deputies folded fast. One broke down in the interview room, palms open, voice cracking. "I didn't mean nothing by it," he said. "It's just how things were." Selena didn't move from her chair. "How things were," she repeated, her voice soft but cutting. Another deputy, younger and slicker, tried a different angle. "It's the leadership," he said, throwing his hands up. "We were just doing what we were taught." Selena looked him straight in the eye. "You chose," she said. "Every time you chose." The excuses didn't matter. The intentions didn't wipe away the harm. The courthouse staff felt the pressure, too. Some resigned quietly, slipping away before the investigations could reach their names. Others stayed, stiff-spined and weary, trying, maybe too late, to prove that they had always been different. It wasn't just about catching the loudest offenders. It was about tearing up the rotten roots and giving something better a chance to grow. By the second week, public forums were being held. Real ones, not stage performances. No glossing over. Selena stood at one of the town meetings, answering questions. Not every face in the crowd was friendly. Some were furious, accusing her of ruining good men's lives. Others were grateful, standing in the back with their arms crossed tightly against their chests, waiting to see if the promises were real this time. A teenage girl, her voice trembling, raised her hand during one forum. "How do you know," she asked, "that it's really going to change?" Selena didn't dodge. "I don't," she said plainly. "But it won't change if we pretend there's nothing wrong." The girl nodded slowly, her face a mixture of fear and hope. Small steps. That's how real change always started. One hearing at a time. One ugly truth dragged into the daylight at a time. One broken system forced to rebuild itself, piece by painful piece. Selena knew the fight wasn't over. It might never truly be, but the faces she saw now, tired, determined, honest, gave her something stronger than certainty. They gave her reason to keep going. But the final chapter wasn't written yet. It still rests in the hands of everyone willing to stand up and carry it forward. 2 months later, the Odessa County Courthouse didn't look the same. From the outside, the bricks were still faded, the windows still a little grimy, but inside, something fundamental had shifted. New faces sat behind the security desks. New deputies, younger, more cautious, visibly more aware that the badge on their chest wasn't a free pass. Judges attended biased training sessions. Court clerks had new procedures. Town hall meetings were regular now. No longer rare events pulled out in emergencies. It wasn't perfect. Selena never expected perfect, but it was movement. Real, painful, honest movement in a place where silence had ruled for too long. Selena returned one last time, walking to the same cracked parking lot, past the same worn flagpole. This time, no one muttered under their breath. No one sneered. People nodded respectfully as she passed, some out of genuine respect, some out of fear. She wasn't there to tell the difference. That wasn't her job anymore. Inside the courtroom, a group of local students sat in the back benches, observing a real trial for a civics project. Their notebooks were open, their eyes sharp. Selena stood quietly in the back, watching. The hearing wasn't perfect. A defense attorney stumbled over a few objections, and the prosecutor seemed a little too eager, but the energy was different. Respect hummed quietly under every interaction, not out of obligation, but out of understanding. As the session wrapped up, the students filed out, buzzing with questions. One young boy, maybe 14, caught sight of Selena and paused. "You really the FBI director?" he asked. Selena nodded, a small smile touching her lips. The world was different now. And so were they? He asked, eyes wide. Selena smiled faintly. I am. The boy shifted his backpack higher on his shoulder, thinking for a moment, are you the one who made them all start acting right? Selena paused, then shook her head. I reminded them, she said simply, but they chose. He nodded, not fully understanding yet, but somehow feeling the weight of it all. Selena watched him rejoin his friends, a little spring in his step now. Maybe he'd remember this moment, maybe not, but seeds had a funny way of growing when you didn't see them planted. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long, honest shadows across the courthouse steps. Selena took one last look around. The old woman selling lemonade on the corner waved at her. The bailiff, a new one, young and serious, held the door open for an elderly man struggling with a walker. Small things, but they mattered. Selena knew there would always be another town, another courthouse, another place where injustice thought it could hide. And she'd be ready, not because she liked to fight, but because some fights were worth it. Before getting into her car, Selena pulled out her notepad one last time. She scribbled a final line. Respect is not optional. Not in Odessa. Not anywhere. With that, she drove away, leaving the courthouse behind, but not the lesson. The people here would have to carry it forward themselves now. And maybe, just maybe, the next time someone walked through those courthouse doors, wearing a simple navy suit, no one would dare think they knew her story just by looking. They'd know better. They'd finally understand. Character isn't measured by who you are when everyone's watching. It's measured by who you are when you think no one ever will. If you believe respect should never be optional, and that true change starts with paying attention, subscribe for more stories that remind us why it matters now more than ever.